Constructive Voices, the podcast for the construction people, with news, views, and expert interviews.
Hi, I'm Steve Randall, and welcome to another of our special podcast episodes featuring the many people that Peter Finn, Pete the Builder, and I spoke to at the Footprint Plus event at the start of June. We learned a lot and discovered some fascinating work that's going on to ensure that the construction industry is part of the greener, more sustainable world that we need as we drive towards carbon net zero. If you can't wait to catch up with all our guests from Footprint Plus, have a listen to our online radio stream where you can hear them all. Just visit constructive-voices.com, don't forget the dash, or ask Alexa to launch Constructive Voices. However you listen, with Constructive Voices, the conversation is building.
Constructive Voices media partner in Ireland and the United Kingdom is Construction Industry News. Since 2002, Construction Industry News has been focused on the very latest projects and developments within the UK and Ireland.
From the Footprint Plus event in Brighton, UK, to the global construction industry.
This is Constructive Voices.
Wendy Bishop from Architype. I'm an associate at the practice based in our London office. Architype, architectural practice, and we've got offices in London, Hereford and Edinburgh. We've been around since 1984. We kind of started with Walter Siegel self-build housing, so kind of social sustainability. But over the last 12 years or so, we've really kind of developed skills and knowledge of passive house, and now more recently Entopia projects. So really delivering environmental sustainability.
Excellent stuff. So retrofit is obviously a hot topic at the moment, and I'm a main contractor as well, construction. I've done quite a lot of work myself on old buildings, heritage buildings, and I've seen quite a lot of bad work done in terms of wrong products used, not allowing buildings breathe, completely against what we would know as conservation practices. How are you finding things along those? Are things improving? Has the sustainability push helped? I feel that it has probably given more information to people at higher level, and then it's filtered its way down to actually on site. Just give me your opinion on that whole thing.
So I think it really helps. When we're looking at retrofit now, we're typically using the Entopia standard. So that's the retrofit part of the passive house standard, and that requires really careful analysis and planning through the design process, and use of the PHP package, as well as using other software to look at thermal bridging and look at moisture movement. So I think that's really key to making sure that whatever materials you're adding to a building to add insulation or airtightness aren't going to be harming that building. So I think that's a really helpful process to making sure that we're not causing harm.
Absolutely. And then we also have to consider, when we are retrofitting our buildings, we want to make sure that they are, the carbon footprint of the building, the carbon emissions are coming from the building, and the embodied carbon in the construction. So we have a lot to have in our minds at the moment. And are we going in the right direction in your opinion?
I think the move, and certainly I'm hearing it here at the conference today, lots of people talking about retrofit and both the challenge, but also, that's where we need to possibly bring in more of our focus. I think with a new build, it's obviously a lot more straightforward to achieve the sustainability targets, but what we have this kind of huge challenge of all these existing buildings that we need to look at how we retrofit. And I think using the Entopia process, I think, is incredibly helpful in doing that in a complete way. So not only would that be reducing the operational energy and therefore carbon emissions, which is absolutely critical, we're also looking at the kind of comfort of those buildings and how people are going to feel comfortable being in those buildings. I think we're also really interested in the embodied carbon of those processes. So the project that I've been speaking about at the conference today, the Entopia Building in Cambridge, it's a key part of our brief, not only to deliver the Entopia standard and certification, but also to do that in a way that is as low embodied carbon as possible. So we were tasked with achieving that and also including as many bio-based materials as possible within the project. And that's been really interesting to both measure that, quantify that, and kind of compare it to other benchmarks that are out there.
Excellent stuff. It's really interesting stuff. The topic of retrofit, I suppose it can be looked at in two ways. You've got your kind of standard built homes that maybe would have been built in the 60s and 70s and 80s, 90s even, that are way below in terms of their thermal efficiency and the heating systems that they've got. But then you have the much older buildings again, and I think there needs to be a lot more knowledge to given to people about, not every building is the same. You have to treat a building in a different way than another building. You have to be sympathetic to how the construction of the building took place from the start. And are you finding that clients are willing to work with you in these terms? Normally when somebody buys a heritage building, they have a love for the building anyway. But are you finding that clients are definitely coming on board with not only being sympathetic to the building and let's say getting it aesthetically back to the way that it formerly was, but also in terms of sustainability and energy efficiency?
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of our clients are local authorities or larger institutions that have maybe an estate. And obviously, they're seeing the need to target net zero and reduce their carbon impacts. So we've been talking to various clients and looking at estate-wide retrofit strategies. Sometimes taking a kind of selection of buildings, as you say, from lots of different eras, because there are many different solutions. And what might work for a 1930s building like the Entopia Building in Cambridge won't work for a 1980s built school up in Scotland. So we've been able, kind of through those feasibility processes, to take a look at a number of buildings for a client and show how you might achieve NFIT or something close to NFIT standard, or what the steps to get there might be, so that how they might break that down into a number of steps to get to an eventual goal. And I think that's been really, that's coming from the client. They're really interested in knowing that. And we're really interested in trying to work that out as well.
Brilliant. Wendy, last question. Obviously, we're here at Footprint Plus. There's so many like-minded people, but the really positive thing that I'm feeling here today is that it's not just sort of everybody from a niche going in a direction that one niche is going in. There's so many different people spread across the whole industry that are here, and they are similar minded, but they're coming to this event with different perspectives. What do you think that you've gained out of being at the event, and what do you think the event will gain with having everybody coming together in one big melting pot the way that it has happened?
I think it's a really exciting event. I mean, it's amazing that this is its very first year, because it feels quite matured. It's been a really interesting and diverse mix of people here and speaking. It's been really interesting. I was here yesterday and I'm here today listening to lots of different talks about a very wide range of subjects. I think it's really important because to solve these issues, we can't do it individually. We need that diversity of approach and of skills. So I'm hoping to kind of come away from this having met people that we can collaborate with in the future, re-meeting some old friendly faces as well that we've collaborated with in the past, and kind of, I think, to be re-inspired and hopefully to take that back to Architype and kind of convey that back to my colleagues, and hopefully we can all produce some more inspirational buildings that we can come and talk about in other years.
Excellent stuff. I have no doubt that you will achieve that. Wendy, thank you very much for your time today. Have a great day.
From the Footprint Plus event in Brighton, UK, to the global construction industry.
This is Constructive Voices.
So I'm Catherine Dewar from Historic England.
I'm David Tomback. I'm Development Economics Director from Historic England.
So, I mean, what a fantastic event this has been, just bringing together so many different people, talking about so many different things. What's been your big takeaway so far?
I think for me, the 3 days has really brought into focus the importance of reusing buildings and the carbon that's embodied in those buildings. And of course, as Historic England, we would say that's important. But it's been a joy to hear everybody else saying it. We've been talking about this, haven't we, for years, and it's just a joy to hear everybody else recognising the importance of doing that for really important reasons.
Yes, I echo what Catherine says. Historic buildings have been reused for generations, but now more than ever it's so important that we recognise that buildings just don't need to be demolished. They can be reused for so many good reasons. And we produced, together with the British Property Federation and the RICS, a publication called Heritage Works. And I can recommend your listeners looking that up, because it gives some really good advice.
And you're absolutely right. Everybody has been mentioning how we can reuse the fantastic buildings we have. And I mean, we do have some amazing buildings, and people absolutely love buildings in a way that, I mean, sometimes if you're from out of town and you go into a town and people say, I love that building, and you think, what do they see in that? But we just do, don't we? Everybody has buildings in their own town and area that they absolutely love, and we should be preserving those.
Yeah. And we know from research that we've done that retaining historic buildings and keeping our heritage is important for our well-being, and we've seen that really importantly over the last couple of years when we've been through the pandemic. People exploring their local area and discovering buildings that they never knew existed, and finding joy in their local area is really important. So we've got to find a way to manage change to buildings. We should not be pickling them. We absolutely need to find pragmatic ways to find new uses for a lot of these buildings.
Yes, I echo with that. We don't look to preserve, we look to conserve. And it's keeping the best parts of the building. And that's why understanding the building is so important. And for any developers listening, my advice to them is to pay the right price. Pay the price that reflects the condition of the building, understand its importance, and understand the real costs of what you're proposing to do. A number of cases I come across where the developers got into problems is when they've paid too much for the site or the property in the first place.
Now, obviously, the big challenge is that these buildings are very often inaccessible to many of the things that need to be done, or certainly easily accessible. So to retrofit is obviously a big deal, and that does cost a lot. But you say it's worth it.
What's the alternative? We have such a historic building stock in this country. You know, most of our building stock is, or a lot of our building stock is pre-1919, traditionally constructed buildings. We have no alternative. We've got to retrofit them, and we've got to reuse them and make them fit for the future.
And I guess it's about finding those solutions. I mean, I saw a robot here, for example, which goes in and puts insulation into sort of Victorian buildings and things without, humans having to try and get into very small spaces. I mean, those sort of solutions are going to be the way forward, aren't they?
Yeah, and I'm a chartered surveyor. I've been qualified for 48 years, and over my career, I start off as a property developer as well. And over my career, I've seen how modern technology has improved with wireless. Instead of having to rip up ceilings and rip up floors, wireless technology has come in, and as we move forward, there are so many more innovative technical solutions that are helping the heritage, enabling developers to be able to retrofit buildings much more cheaply and much more simply without causing harm to the fabric than they used to.
And we're constantly doing research into finding innovative ways of retrofitting buildings, because we've got to find the solutions basically. And a lot of the people here are also doing amazing work to make that possible.
I love it. I will remember you saying, what's the alternative? That's the big takeaway there from what you've said, I think, because, we have to protect those buildings and conserve them. Where can people find out more about what Historic England does and how they can get in contact with you?
So have a look at our website, www.historicengland.org.uk, and it's all there.
Constructive Voices.
Live at Footprint Plus.
I have Shane and Serena from WSP.
I do a lot of the net zero R&D, so my background's in building services, and I'm currently working in our kind of building performance group, doing a lot of kind of energy modelling. But I've been really involved with Serena here, in part of our net zero journey at WSP, which has been real kind of development. We made this big commitment kind of a year ago to halve the carbon footprint of our designs and advice by 2030. So we spent the last year kind of running around frantically trying to figure out what that actually meant for us, and doing a lot of kind of carbon benchmarking and measurements. But yeah, so really, it's really great to just be here at Footprint today, and actually kind of start meeting people that you see a lot of these. I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces on Zoom or whatever that have cropped up, and it's just great to meet everyone in real life, and yeah, it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to actually be sitting talking to people again rather than over Zoom. So yourself, Serena, would you like to sort of come in there?
Yeah, so I'm Serena and I'm a facade engineer. So I'm basically doing what Shane was explaining for building services, translated to facades. And we work together to develop a tool that we presented today, which is called Daisy. And it's like a parametric design tool. And so we came today to just give everyone a sneak peek of what we do, just to decarbonize building in WSP. Because as Shane said, this is a journey that we started like more than a year ago, and we're working all together, different teams, trying to join our forces to, decarbonize buildings. So we look forward to do that, and today was a good opportunity to stay here and meet all these inspiring people doing the same.
Brilliant. Yeah, I spoke to David there just before yourselves. He's obviously a director there, and he was telling me about the commitment that the company has made, which is fantastic. And it's great to see that you're reinforcing the fact that you are actually committing to it and getting it done. I can see
We're proving what he said.
100%, and I can see the excitement and the desire in your eyes to get it done. So tell me a little bit more about, did you say Daisy was the name of the yeah. So back to yourself there, Serena, if you don't mind just developing maybe a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so Daisy is like a parametric design tool, and it combines artificial intelligence, sustainability, and digital. And we are developing this tool because our aim is to decarbonize building, and we want to do it in a performance-based approach. So in this way, we can look at the building holistically, and we can try to estimate the carbon emissions of a building, as well as other performances, so that we can evaluate a good set of building scenarios, so that we can start in the conceptual design, and then we can bring forward something which is already optimized at the beginning of the process.
Excellent stuff. And you both work obviously in two different areas of the same field. So how do you collaborate that within the package of Daisy?
Yeah, it's been a collaborative process from the beginning, really. I mean, that's almost kind of the whole point. We were doing, each of us were developing our own individual kind of carbon assessment tools to try and figure out the carbon footprint of our designs and advice, like I mentioned earlier. And like, it just made so much sense to bring all of that knowledge together. And I think WSP is kind of like quite unique in that way, that we've got experts in all loads of different fields, and that we do have that opportunity to kind of bring everything together. And I think Daisy is one of one of those research projects where we can put it all under one roof, kind of thing, and like and really like harness all of that work that we've done and like bring it together, and then that actually like enables that kind of the kind of whole building kind of design elements. We've all worked together. So that you can actually fully understand all of those different performance metrics, but like combine them together. So you're not, you're kind of, you can iterate the design process much faster, and therefore like test way more designs and do it together, rather than having to like maybe wait for another consultant. And you might have to wait, ask a question, wait a week for the response, and that like really slows down the design process. Whereas if you've already got the database, and you've accumulated that all together, then you can just kind of, you can design those tools to really iterate and maximize performance. Just basically harness all that knowledge and work that we've spent over the last kind of year or two.
Excellent stuff. Really sounds very interesting. So, last question. You are the young people here at this event. You are the youth. You are the future. You are the hope of the universe. I'm obviously exaggerating a little bit there, but like you would have grown up with sustainability in your mind, whereas I didn't. I'm probably twice both your ages, but when I grew up, it was much more traditional build. There was barely even thought of insulation, never mind, sustainability and, energy efficiency and all of those good things that we do these days. So I think your perspectives are probably a little bit different than people who are older than you, and which is good, because that means that it comes natural to you guys, whereas we're trying to, retrain a lot of people, who've done things in a certain way, and it has worked for them economically, and it has worked for them within their business. So I suppose, what is your perspective on the future? I think a lot of positive steps have been made. Do you guys think that we're going in the right direction? Do you think that we're going to get to our final target of, carbon net zero and, basically having a sustainable economy, a sustainable industry, and a sustainable planet. So that very interesting question goes to you first, Serena.
Yeah, so as you said, like, because we're the younger generation, it's good that we're conscious of what we're doing. I mean, more conscious than before. And I think we're going in the right direction. I don't want to be disruptive. There are a lot of things that we need to fix to go in that direction, for sure. But I think that the biggest point here is that we as consultants, we can make more than just advising, and we can really push for like circular economy and all those concepts that we are discussing today, because it's really a collaborative approach, the one we have to push forward, and so we're doing our best to like work together.
I think there's two aspects of that. Obviously, we're here today, and it's really positive. And I've been in the industry that long, kind of 5 years or so since I started my career, and I can feel the industry shift over the last 2 years. When we started, it was a real push to get any kind of sustainability credentials through projects. You'd get clients and would just not want to pay for it. And now some of the developers and people we work with, our clients today, they're pushing us now. They're like, we really want all of this stuff in the building. It's got to be that, because it's now become a good financial decision for them. It's a good investment to do this stuff. But I would caveat that in the context of the climate emergency, we are not doing enough, nowhere near quick enough. And in terms of the rate of global heating and carbon emissions have not slowed down. So in the context of that overall kind of global carbon picture, there's still a hell of a lot of work left to do. And this is the start, and there's a lot of reason to be hopeful and promising. But we've really got to get our move on basically, and make sure this is not just a few net zero projects that are shiny and have all the bells and whistles, but it's actually complete transformational kind of change across all buildings, and that's why we're here, I guess.
Well done, very well said. It's very nice to meet both of you, and I honestly mean this. The construction industry future is bright, and we've got very clever people with the right mindset coming through, and the next generation behind you again. I hope that you will filter that knowledge down to them as well. Thank you very much.
From the Footprint Plus event in Brighton, UK, to the global construction industry.
This is Constructive Voices.
I'm Sophie Cole, and I'm an architect at McHale Riches. We're an architectural practice that specialises in housing design and mixed-use neighbourhoods. Our priority is obviously sustainable design. We work with a lot of local authorities, housing providers, some private developers, to hopefully create beautiful places that people love to live in.
Well, you know what? I'm looking around the walls here of your stand, and every bit of it tells a story, and there are so many stories to share. I mean, the way that the developments are changing because of this drive towards carbon net zero, and obviously addressing the climate crisis. How have you seen things changing over the last few years?
Oh, just our clients are there asking us to do it, which before I think we felt that sometimes you had to push a green agenda. I think thankfully now everyone seems to be more on the same page. Our Goldsmith Street project in Norwich that won the Sterling Award a couple of years ago is 100% social rent for Norwich Council and passive house, so that's been a real stepping stone for us in terms of learning how to deliver passive house at scale, at cost. And put us in a really good position for sort of new projects like our clients at the City of York that are pushing that further and wanting to provide zero carbon in operation homes.
And I see from there the story that you tell on the street there. It says, we believe that the City of York will be the first local housing authority to achieve zero carbon housing at scale. I mean, what sort of scale are we talking about?
So their housing delivery programme at the moment is, I think, 600 homes across 5 years. You'd have to check me on those. So they've got, a good portfolio of sites that they own, and they set up this framework to work with the team to help them deliver that. So that's really great. So a couple of our sites have just got into building contract with them, so that's again, don't quote me on the numbers, but about 120, I think, new passive house homes have just gone into contract. And then we've got a scheme of 85 homes going to planning committee tomorrow. So what's great there is that, we're working at speed to get the houses built. So, yeah.
And for you as an architect, how exciting is it to be, obviously it's always going to be exciting working on new ideas and new structures, but because this is such a big thing for not just the industry but for the world, how exciting is it as an architect to be a part of the solution, a big part of the solution?
Really exciting. Often quite bewildering, that sort of old thing of like the more you know and the more problems you hear about, the harder it is and the less you know. So I think there's always a bit of that. And as an industry, I think we're making sort of great moves, but I think the embodied carbon and how to measure that and bring that into the design process really early is really important. And then there's more and more conversations I'm having around, and particularly here actually, is about retrofit and people's existing stock and how they start to manage and tackle that. And I think that's really interesting. We've started doing a bit of we've been doing retrofit for a while. Park Hill in Sheffield is just about to complete, which is a huge retrofit project of a 1960s brutalist concrete frame building. So
the challenge with something like that is, 1960s building, some people love it, some people are not so keen.
Yeah.
But is there a sense that you need to try and preserve the heritage in all kinds of buildings, whether people would say, oh yeah, that was a fantastic period for building or not?
Yeah.
And obviously, to retrofit with the way that it needs to be done to be sustainable, but trying to marry those two things. How complicated is that?
I think it is complicated. I think you have to look at every building separately. I think Park Hill is listed, so obviously that puts that project in sort of one process. But then you look at other buildings and you have to do the testing and the modelling to see what the retrofit would do, how you can retrofit, whether it's insulating externally, internally, and then looking at the intervention you have to make and the embodied carbon and putting that into the whole life carbon costing, because it's not obviously it's great to retain as much as you possibly can, but it's not as simple necessarily as saying everything has to retain, because in terms of carbon sometimes that's not the right route.
It's got to be realistic, hasn't it? With the aims that we're working towards. And how important are sort of finding new materials and sort of learning about the new materials that are coming through to this process?
Really important. Again, lots more materials I think coming to the market.
That creates a challenge though for you, because you will have come through your career as an architect based on certain materials, and some of those are not going to be popular, and some other materials that perhaps we don't even know about yet are going to be the ones that we are going to need to work with in the future.
Yeah, are you talking about the sort of the products that are developing to lower embodied carbon and that
absolutely.
sort of thing? Yeah, but I think as an architect you're always learning. It's part of your profession to continually learn, and we sort of try and stay on top of that as best we can.
This is Constructive Voices.
So I'm Steve Hearn. I'm one of the founding directors of Mid Group, a main contractor, principal contractor with a bias towards off-site modern methods of construction, and obviously context of today's conversation, sustainable construction, so timber-led building.
Yeah, I heard some of your talk there was very interesting. I come from a carpentry background, so I'm very interested in the timber side of things. So there's certainly a lot of transition happening in construction in general, and is that something you're going to do towards mass timber construction? Is that something that you're driving towards, and where do you see that type of construction in terms of the levels it's going to go to?
So for us as a business, we want to do more of it. We've proven with the building that we're about to hand over that it works. It can work. It does work. There's no need to be scared of it, and actually we just need to build that momentum and sort of do more of it. But I think as an industry we've got to push forward with it, take the lessons we've learned. Some of the panel discussion today was about sharing information and about people seeing and believing it, and I think for our business perspective, we want to be at the forefront of that. We want to push that forward. We want to be part of that conversation because we've seen the result and we believe it. So.
Yeah, great to hear a company of your size having that interest in this type of thing. So being at an event like Footprint Plus, I suppose, has probably given you the opportunity to meet like-minded people and collaborate, hopefully in the future with similar, minded people. How has it been to be under one roof with so many kind of people with a similar drive, and have you made good connections here?
I think what's quite interesting of this is there's a different feel. There are numerous trade events and trade shows, and they all feel a little bit the same. There's a lightness of atmosphere here. There's a lightness of almost like a sort of emotional response, and it feels quite refreshing. Everybody you're talking to is kind of like he's positive and upbeat and wants to do more, and that's great. I think the event seems to be very successful. So, and yeah, certainly it's easy to talk to people and bump into people when you're all on the same page.
Yeah, and I think, coming to an event like this, it's done in kind of an informal way, so you're kind of able to discuss it rather than sitting down and it breaks barriers and opens up sort of easier conversations. So, final question, because I know you're a busy man. Going forwards, are we doing enough in the construction industry? And what's your plans to make sure that your company can push on and make sure that you're at the forefront?
I think the answer is probably not doing enough. There's more we can do, but we are constrained by legislation and the market conditions. We need the government to support, the industry needs the government support. It's been alluded to in conversations today that if we can start to unlock some of these legislative issues, and we can make huge inroads into it really quite quickly, because the appetite's there, the evidence is there, the proof's there. It's getting through the sort of political landscape that's more challenging. So yeah, that's where we need to push things on.
Good stuff, Steve. Thank you very much for your time, and best luck in the future.
Constructive Voices.
Live at Footprint Plus.
My name's Paul Lincoln. I work for the Landscape Institute, and I edit a magazine called Landscape, which is the Institute's quarterly journal.
So, Paul, tell me about the Institute.
We are the institute representing landscape architects in the UK, so we've got about 6,000 members who are either landscape designers, landscape managers and landscape planners, or students.
And obviously this is an inaugural event for Footprint Plus.
Yeah.
Lots of people here. Why was it important for you to be here?
Well, we're really pleased to be here. I mean, it's very exciting to have a brand new event to come to, not least after 2 or 3 years of being locked down. Landscape and landscape architecture is absolutely at the heart of sustainable development. How you treat the landscape, how you manage it, whether or not you invest in green infrastructure or grey infrastructure is really at the heart of the debate. Interestingly, the government's chief planner was speaking about an hour ago, Joanna Averley, and she unprompted just made a very clear statement about the value and role of landscape as part of the planning process, and particularly in terms of new housing developments. We are taking part, or my chief executive is chairing a session tomorrow looking at embodied carbon. This is a topic a lot of people are talking about this here, but on the whole, people discuss embodied carbon in terms of new buildings. Or I was just listening to a talk a few minutes ago about, do you recycle steel? Do you manufacture steel in a low carbon way? I think it's really helpful to turn the spotlight onto what is a landscape in which you can analyse the extent to which carbon is, how embodied it is, and what decisions you have to make. I mean, a good example of this is you can make a decision between investing in, say, a hard landscape using a lot of concrete and cement, or a green landscape, and particularly a permeable landscape. it's really fascinating. Many local authorities, and in fact I noticed this on the way here, are replacing part of the highway with sustainable drainage systems. So instead of concrete drains taking the waste somewhere else, you've got rain falling into the soil, into the ground, but you make room for that by planting trees, by maybe wildflower planting. So there's a very interesting move, and I would say it particularly possibly linked to the pandemic, in which people suddenly realised that green places were places of salvation in a way. So partly moved along by that. There's a really very interesting new consideration of the role of landscape architecture in terms of creating resilient environments that can come some way to tackling climate emergency.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you mention how people's views have changed, because we all know those city centres, town centres you drive in, and it's something of a concrete jungle. And I think to some extent people have been okay with that a little bit. They've had a window box and they thought, well, I'm fine. I've got a little bit of a plant going on there. That's all right. But I think the pandemic has highlighted that people want more than that. And actually, I mean, I've noticed when I drive into somewhere and there's construction going on, I'll notice that they've cut down a load of trees, and I'll also notice that where they're creating a landscaped area that perhaps they wouldn't have done a few years ago.
Sure, I think that's right. And interestingly, I've just thought of two schemes. One of them is there's been a major rearrangement of the centre of Sheffield. Sheffield happens to have a very large landscape architecture department in its university, and part of, I think possibly under its influence, a lot of the grey areas of the centre of post-war Sheffield have been green. But equally, there's a major scheme here going right through the centre of Brighton, which was only completed about a year ago. It's a 10-year scheme which has really been to completely change the landscape of central Brighton. It's the part running parallel to the sea, so not quite going, but you have to pass through from the railway station. And because I did an article on that for our magazine, and what was fascinating is it's had party support, Green Party, Labour Party, Conservative Party support over a 10-year development period. And the thing about landscape is it does involve serious investment and serious time. So to be able to champion a scheme like the one in the heart of Brighton is I think, very useful.
So obviously a lot of people are talking to you at this event. We've got, we're halfway, kind of on the second day of this event. Plenty more people coming through over the next few days. People have spoken to you already over the first day and a half. What are they saying to you, and what are they learning from you about how we move all this forward?
I think what people are saying is there's a big gulf between motivation and implementation. So I think it's fair to say that an exhibition and conference, which this is clearly doing both, like this, shows that there is a huge interest in addressing climate emergency, but it's not necessarily obvious to many practitioners, and this is essentially an event for people who are in the business of designing or managing, that it is not necessarily obvious either how you make change, or perhaps most importantly, how you persuade your client to commission change. Because clearly there is within the construction industry, there is a chain of command that goes through developer, commissioner, practitioner, and getting everyone to appreciate the changes which can be made, and then getting people to appreciate the changes that should be made is very difficult. But on the other hand, hopefully a conversation which it's not started here, it's been going on for 10 years, but hopefully a conversation which is being accelerated by this event will carry on. What I would say is that there is a great deal, it's fair to say there has always been a lot of interest in the relationship between landscape and architecture, and landscape architecture, and what it means to bring nature into the city. There's also quite recently been a lot of publicity around what does it mean to rewild agricultural settings, and every now and then I'm now seeing a discussion on, well, what would it mean to rewild an urban setting. There's also, I think, a fascinating debate, because so much of the debate is around recycling of buildings and the proper use of space. I think there's also a very interesting debate not only about what you do to the buildings, but what you do to the spaces around them. many of which, perhaps in the post-war generation of housing development, have often been quite empty green spaces. And a green space is not necessarily a biodiverse space, and yet you can then have a conversation about, do you build allotments or do you have a much more biodiverse planting scheme than, say, so there's, I would say that the overall picture now is confusing, but in a useful way. I mean, being confused is not necessarily a bad thing if it leads them to action and thought. So I think I'm really happy that we're at this event. Our big conversation is tomorrow afternoon, so I hope people listening to this broadcast will come along tomorrow afternoon, because we've got a bunch of very interesting speakers, and specifically I'm very keen that I think it's fair to say there's been a lot of work being done on embodied carbon within buildings. There's been a lot of work being done by organisations like the Architects Journal with their Retrofit First campaign, and I think it would be really useful now to build on, if that's the right word, follow from that work in terms of how do you translate that into landscape architecture. It may not be obvious what the links are, and so it's about partly learning from that quite recent tradition. We are publishing, I will plug a paper, we're publishing a paper in about 6 weeks' time looking specifically at embodied carbon in the landscape, and that will be guidance, but also a paper that debates how best to do this. That paper will be published for our members, who will then be able to use that to advocate for addressing the issue for their clients. So I think that is part of a very useful. And I also say that we will be publishing a special edition of the magazine in November, which looks at materials and looks at, for me I think it's fascinating, looks at the whole issue of specification, because for every single thing that you design you have a choice, which cobble, which paving slab, which tree, what is the impact of each of those elements, where has it been sourced from, what was the supply train, to what extent, are you properly analysing issues around modern slavery? There's a whole collection of issues. So I think being able to look in some detail around procurement and specification is, for me, a really important issue that we will be doing a load more work on over the next couple of months.
And of course, the consumer movement behind this is key, because developers, town planners, whoever's looking at this will be looking on return on investment, as always. But actually, if consumers are pushing for better, greener spaces, it makes a business case for ensuring this.
I think that's a really interesting point, and I've got very clear evidence for this, because I worked quite a long time ago for a housing association, and what they would normally do when promoting their new development, they always had like a married couple drinking wine on the balcony, watching the sunset over Stratford, in this case. If you look at the hoardings and the marketing for organisations like Linleaf, for example, which has nearly completed the Elephant Park development in South London, there is a huge focus on green infrastructure, on investing in and also it's really interesting, investing in public parks, investing in private parks, investing in gardens, balconies, sometimes green walls and often green roofs. So over that period, I would say over a period of about 20 years, just my own observation is there's a realisation, and this was before the pandemic, because something like Elephant Park has been in the pipeline for a decade. So over this period, there's been this significant realisation by developers that investing in landscape is a good investment. I think the pandemic has then accelerated things. I think there was a notion that the whole of, say, London was about to move out. That clearly hasn't happened, I'm pleased to say. But clearly people do want benign environments, and some of that is about access to shopping and schools. But a very major part of that is what space do I have for myself and my family? How near is it? How easy can I walk to it? And what is the quality? I think the issue of what is the quality of that space. And also one thing I think is increasingly interesting is the way you might want to link one park with a tree-lined street, or to create network, which are not only useful to nature, but in a way it's really nice if you can walk to the station along a green route. Now, that's not going to happen if it isn't planned. But on the other hand, it can be planned, and that doesn't seem to me too much to ask.
Well, I think it's a fascinating conversation, and one which is at the very heart of everything that we're doing here at Footprint Plus. Where can people find out more about your organisation?
Landscapeinstitute.org, and the magazine, which is called Landscape. If you simply go into the issue platform, you're very welcome to view it online free of charge. You just look for Landscape Institute, and the last edition was on diversity in landscape, who gets to design landscape, what's it for, and the one that's going to press later this week is on beauty and planning, which is a subject which has already been touched on by the government's director of planning. So I think it couldn't be more topical.
Constructive Voices.
I'm Seb. My practice we're structural engineers, structural civil geotechnical engineers, 60 odd in the UK, partly based in Brighton. And then we've got a business in Serbia and in India as well. And structural civil geotechnical engineering.
Excellent stuff. A bit like Constructive Voices, you are global. You've got global recognition, which is excellent. So I heard a little bit of your talk there today. Really interesting stuff. Would you like to just develop a little bit about what you spoke about today?
Sure. So we were talking about retrofit and how we make retrofit an easier thing for developers and clients to do. The retrofit reusing buildings is not a new thing. It's been done forever, and buildings continually are reinvented and reused and repurposed. We're in a point in time, perhaps over the last 20 or 30 years, where the sort of financial incentives and also the fashion is to knock down and rebuild a lot. When you rebuild a building and build a new one, the carbon emissions are humongous, they're massive. Even if you rebuild a very efficient new building, to sort of earn that carbon back through efficient running of the building takes well over the lifetime of the building to do. So where buildings already exist, we need to find ways to reuse and repurpose them. And the talk today was taking us through quite an extreme example of a building in Croydon called Zodiac Court, which has been disused for 30 years, and we are reusing it.
Excellent stuff. And do you think is there enough of a drive within the industry and from government and institutional level towards this train of thought, or is there still the concept there of knock and rebuild, or are we beginning to see more of the thought process of using existing buildings and repurposing?
This is a massive generalisation, but I think most people are petrified and worried about climate change on a personal level. They worry about it, they read it in the news, they're worried for their kids. Then we all have jobs, and in our world it's property construction, and we work within the constraints and the incentives of those jobs, whatever you do. So I don't believe people sit at home and worry about climate change and then consciously go in and say, hey, it's a really, really good idea to add to climate change by building a brand new tall glass, steel or concrete building. I don't think we do that, but I do think the legislative environment, the money, the tax, and also our experience over the last 20 or 25 years tends to push us towards that. On a personal level, I did a sustainability course 22 years ago, Leadership and Sustainable Development Masters, and the sea change I've seen in behaviours has come around the pandemic, and I don't know if that's a reflective thing. People have gone, hang on, we're quite vulnerable, or what. But there is a sea change in attitudes. I think there's a lot of stuff that, if it shifted, would enable people to enact their personal views. So, for example, a lot of people talk about VAT on reused buildings where there isn't any VAT on new build. And there's a plethora of other incentives that drive people or make it harder for people to do what they think is the right thing to do, or make it easier for them to do what the wrong thing is, let's say. So I think actually, broadly speaking, the construction and property industry want to do the right thing on a personal level, and I think it is too difficult at the moment for people to make the obvious choices. what Steve was talking about is just do the right thing, make it simple. But he's a pretty unique chap, and he's got a lot of drive behind him. And actually, we do need to make it easier for people to make the right choices that deals with the climate emergency that we have.
Are we going in the right direction? Do you, like you said that like 22 years ago you did a course and you said that you did see a change during the pandemic, which is, pretty much very recent times. I personally I'm beginning to see a little bit of action, whereas previously it was a lot of talk. Have we started to make the right steps? Are we going in the right direction?
I think let's be positive. The good thing is we're talking. We're at this conference. It's fantastic. It's been organised. Long may it last. I hope it grows and I hope it influences. The word of warning is my grandfather wrote a book in the 1970s called Small is Beautiful and talked about environmental economics and was very clear in the choices we needed to make and where we needed to go with economics, with energy, with land, with water. That was the 1970s. We're now in 2022. So we're having a conversation, but let's not get too excited because we're talking about things like net zero, which is really a veil for people to hide behind when they're still doing predominantly the same thing that they did yesterday. So 10 years ago, they're building a steel building with glass on it. Now we say, oh, we're worried about carbon. They build the same building and they say net zero. That's still emitting humongous amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. It's adding to climate change. And those people doing this, including us, we're not bad people, but we have to have these honest conversations. Because if we're not honest, then we don't actually have the difficult conversations about where we can change things. So, in answer to your question, I think great that we're talking. Long may it last. Let the conversations be honest and not backslapping, because the backslapping doesn't help. It needs to be collaborative. This isn't a sort of commercial benefit conversation where, hey, we do net zero buildings, they don't. That's irrelevant. It's got to be collaboration between firms and businesses that might have previously thought they were competing. We need to share ideas. We need to be open source about it. So great. I think that perhaps the wind has changed. Whether we've got the sails up or not, I don't know.
Seb, thank you very much for your time. Very honest summarisation there at the very end, and best of luck in the future.
Thanks.
And that's all for this episode of Constructive Voices. Please take a moment to share it with others who may find it interesting. Follow or subscribe to get the latest episodes automatically on your favourite podcast app, and rate and review the podcast if you can. You can also listen to the latest episode by saying, Alexa, play Constructive Voices podcast.
Here's Constructive Voices. Here's the latest episode.
And on our website, where there's lots more information too. That's constructive-voices.com. Don't forget the dash. Until next time, thanks for listening. You're really helping us build something.